Kyle here from All Media Reviews. I'm here to do a review of the film Omar and Cedric. One thing I was going to mention, 1992 Albums of the Year is coming, could be later today. I do want to do is after I'm done with 92, not taking exactly a break from my own process, but I feel like I'm way behind on 2024 albums in terms of my sort of time spending with them, so I may have a delay on the 93 list. I don't know, we'll see, but that's I'm just kind of thinking about. And I'm going to be doing, obviously, Pepe Deluxe's Queen of the Wave, the next Pepe Deluxe album review this week. Could be tomorrow, could be Thursday, depends. I'm not working Thursday, but I'm going to the doctor, so. But this is a review of the guys from At the Drive-In, the Mars Volta, Omar and Cedric, If This Ever Gets Weird. And Omar Rodriguez-Lopez and Cedric Bixler-Zavalas. Omar Rodriguez-Lopez, the guitarist and founder of the Mars Volta, one of the founders of the Mars Volta, you learn in the film, but he shot footage, shot like home film video footage. He just shot video footage, documented video, like a lot of people, going back to when he said he was like 7 years old. He's about the same age as me. I think he was born in 76. So, based on the title, I mean, I'm a fan of the Mars Volta, of course, and I like some of the At the Drive-In music and some of the other stuff that Omar and Cedric have done, a little bit, Bosnian Rainbows, and the band that they talked about that was like a side project of those guys when they were De Facto. I was trying to think of it. De Facto, I spent very little time with De Facto. I've just known of it. Anyway, so I had an obvious interest in this. There's never been like a proper documentary on their story, even though I've known their story a fair amount about it, but not a ton, like in terms of like the inner workings and, behind the scenes content that that they've kept maybe behind the scenes for a lot of it. So, but this film is not about. Well, I probably should say something first. It's currently available to stream via a film festival. It's called Krakow Film Festival.pl. It's in Poland, I guess. I'm not sure, but I think you might need some kind of VPN for it. I don't know. Wasn't necessarily needing to, but a lot of people have seen it at festivals and stuff like that. But this is where you can get it. Hopefully, it will be made more available in the coming. We've been wanting about this. We heard about this last year. The trailer, I don't know, it was like last fall maybe. It was like because then it was like talking about getting into film festivals. Then it ended up at Sundance, I think. I saw an interview with the two guys and then the filmmaker. The filmmaker, the guy who put the whole thing together, in effect, this gentleman named Nicolas Jack Davies, who, just myself liking to do a little research and know their background, he actually did something for Local Natives. Local Natives, the Colorado River. I don't know if that's was just like a video he shot, maybe. Anyway, yeah, he'd done other music like Animal Collective and. Anyway, I mean, he's not like this highly known producer and film director. That was what he produced. Gorillaz, he directed a Gorillaz video. So he's done his share. Mumford & Sons. Yeah, his background is mostly in music videos and music-based film. He did some score, When Brave Birds Saved. When Brave Birds Saved, anyway, back in 2013. So, yeah, Omar had all this footage he shot going back to when he was 7 years old, up to the present day. So this is not a film. After you watch it now, I may want to watch it again. I mean, the trailer made it look trippy and, based on the title, If This Ever Gets Weird. It's not the Mars Volta or At the Drive-In or Omar Rodriguez-Lopez, Cedric Bixler-Zavalas, like, musical biography film documentary. It's really more a documentary telling the story of the two of them just based on the title and their relationship. There's other factors, and of course, a lot of it contains content, footage from how he met Cedric. Omar did, because Omar's kind of the driving force behind it. And I think you think about the twin. It's kind of a democratic, the Mars Volta, but as a whole, I always kind of lean toward Omar being sort of the primary person behind a lot of endeavors. He did a lot of the business side of it when they changed the Mars Volta. See, that's the thing. It tells a story about at the drive-in, which started the footage. Some of the footage starts from when they're going to be making their last record. Not their last record, but the last record before they broke up. They did a reunion album later. Relationship of Command. And, their relationship with Jim Ward. How they met Jim Ward and, Omar coming up. Because he was from Puerto Rico, his family, and then they moved to South Carolina, and he talks about how there's a lot of racism there at that point, especially when that was in the mid-'80s. Then his family moved to El Paso, Texas, and so I'm talking about how there was, at least in El Paso, him being of, his ethnicity, there was more Hispanic and Latin population there, being so close to Mexico. But there still was a fair amount of challenges with race and, just things he dealt with, but he found punk rock and he found music to be kind of his, and even salsa to be a sort of outlet, like a lot of kids. They ended up meeting these guys. He met Jim Ward eventually. He was in another band, Cedric. He meets Cedric eventually, and then eventually they meet Jim. If I'm not saying the exact details, I need to watch it. I kind of watch it in gaps, like different segments last night, not full at once. But they were at the drive-in, but at the drive-in for whatever it was, 6-7 years. That was the mid '90s, and they got to be popular, but they weren't really reaching the sort of mentality. Their music wasn't, intention of their music wasn't necessarily being felt in their perception, because they were being kind of considered a hardcore band. And then there's even one scene where on the scene, Cedric gets on the mic and says, we're not hardcore, we're not a hardcore band, and I think because the creative differences, the old traditional creative difference you hear about, two or more people in a band would kind of sometimes creates good art, but sometimes just ultimately doesn't, allow the band to, thrive or continue on for extensive amounts of time. Ended up, they felt like they wanted to do something different. They wanted to incorporate salsa music. And frankly, they didn't talk about it specifically, but classic rock, progressive rock, they wanted to do more kind of melodic, creative things versus just sort of the energy of punk, I think, that they were doing to some degree with At the Drive-In. People consider Relationship of Command to be going in that direction anyway, and they just had challenges with Jim, so that's how they basically had to do something different. They were doing De Facto, and I guess De Facto just got completely destroyed by some people because people loved At the Drive-In. But they met it's Jim Ward's, I think it was his brother, it's either brother or cousin, his brother Jeremy, and that's how they kind of formed the Mars Volta. They met this guy named Ike. And then they kind of get into the early parts of the Mars Volta, the Tremulin EP. They did some touring. Then eventually the making of The Lost in the Comatorium. Unfortunately, Omar talks about how drugs were definitely something that they were around. They end up getting involved in, and Jeremy, unfortunately, specifically, he eventually had to go to rehab. But he actually, and spoilers, of course, people that don't know, Jeremy Ward passed away even before The Lost in the Comatorium was released. But that sort of definitely had a big impact on them, and I don't fully understand one thing about the way the narrative with Omar is talking about his love, his connection to Cedric. They were like soulmates, but also to Jeremy. Were they romantically? I got that impression, but there weren't a lot of details. It was kind of subtle, those comments, but he brought it up more than once. So maybe they were romantically involved, or they just were sexual partners. Experiment. I'm not sure. It was kind of subtle, and a second reviewing might help me if I can get the chance to do that. But so then you learn about the Mars Volta, of course. What happens at the aftermath of Jeremy? They did a lot of live hits. They were on the Latin Grammys and stuff like that. They had, I remember that distinctly with Roca from Rage Against the Machine, basically announcing them. Like giving them a send off, comparing them to, like, you know, Zach De La Roca, but I think it was him, I'm pretty sure. And yeah, they played on that Grammy show, and then they eventually talked about making Francis the Mute, which is my favorite of their records. The whole premise behind it being very mysterious. Also, I didn't mention their bass player was Eva Gardner, but then she didn't end up staying with the band. Eva Gardner? Gardner. She might have been on the Tremulant EP, but I don't think... Eva Gardner. Yeah. They didn't really have, like, a lot of dialogue with her. They talked a little bit about her, then they eventually talked about how Flea came in from the Chili Peppers, and then John Frusciante. And... Well, so talking about Francis the Mute, they did talk about that and the premise behind it, about this woman who was born sort of trying to find her actual birth parents or birth mother. Anyway, it's a fictional premise, but it was a very creative premise. They didn't, again, with the Loust and Tremulant even, you could say, and Francis... They talked about them to a degree, but they didn't really talk about a lot of the actual musical content. It wasn't about that. It was largely about Omar's relationships with some of the people in the band and them playing live, and also Cedric and Omar and Cedric's relationships, you could say. And they got into it. They talked about hiring John Theodore too. I forgot about that. But they didn't go that in detail about him either. It was just weird. But how he ended up leaving the band, they mentioned that, and then later we found out. Then they kind of skipped ahead and talking about how where they were at, and some of it was based on after really Amputexture, Cedric's relationship with this woman he met, and I think it was 2008, so that was around Bedlam. They didn't talk about Bedlam at all. They didn't talk about Octahedron either. But the whole Scientology thing with Cedric, which I've known about, but I didn't delve into a lot of details. But his girlfriend at the time, and eventually wife, was involved in Scientology. He got involved. He thought it would help him. He was, I don't know, he was like struggling financially at some point. He not so much that, but he wanted to do a solo album, which never came out, I don't think. I know that at one point when they kind of had the hiatus, he was under Zavalas. There was going to be an album. I was really curious about it, but he gets into kind of really the last 15 years or so, or last 13 years, like how they end up breaking up. Omar, of course, has done extensive number of solo records. They didn't even talk that much about... He said he kind of was frequently just playing and recording stuff. They showed that footage. He was doing film, too. And he was on the set of his film he was making when Cedric posted how he was quitting the Mars Volta in 2012. That kind of came up and sort of had that... They had a little bit of a division, unfortunately. And that was right around the time that his mother passed away too, Omar's, which is just like sort of salt in the wound. But time kind of started to heal, and Cedric, the whole thing with the Scientology kind of eventually showed up. This whole drama with Danny Masterson from That 70s Show, and he was a Scientologist, and his his girlfriend, and he ended up sexually assaulting her and all this stuff. And then later we found out in some of the legal cases, and Cedric was very verbal about that. He ended up leaving Scientology, but so he ended up basically making amends and reconnecting with a couple of years later Omar. Man, how many years? It was like 2014, and then leaving Scientology, and then they did that Anti-Mask, which I remember that. I wanted to like that. I thought it was okay, but it wasn't the Mars Volta. And then the whole thing that happened after Anti-Mask was like a one-off, really. Ike passed away around that time too, which was really hard for them to take. So losing Jeremy Ward and using Ike was just kind of difficult, but very kind of it definitely paved the way for where where Omar went creatively in his life. I think he ended up being with more than one girlfriend though. So that's the thing about his sexuality that wasn't fully addressed. But anyway, of course, the Mars Volta at the drive-in did a reunion around that time, tours, and then they eventually did an album that was largely to do with, not largely, but it had motivation from Cedric for some of his financial challenges. But what am I getting at here? They had similar issues with Jim Ward that they had before, kind of like sort of just like a power struggle, and also the way that things want to run. And Omar, having been running a lot of the business side of the Mars Volta, when they did the reunion for that, the drive-in, I think he wanted things to be a little more professional, or what you want to call it, things to be normal. And I don't know if Jim was really interested in doing that. So I'm not sure when they did the reunion if Jim was even involved, which is weird. But they did the album. I remember listening to it and not thinking much. Some of my friends would have liked it. I mean, it wasn't identical to the At the Drive-In stuff from before, but and then they kind of started to do the Mars Volta again, but he didn't want to do music, and then the last 5 years they've talked about a lot of the stuff that they've become like family men basically. But again, I don't know Omar's exact position, his relationship status, everything. He just kind of expressed his love for these people, like these males. But then again, he was involved with, I read 2 different women online, so I don't know. It's a documentary about his life, but at the same time, I'm sure there was a reason why he didn't dive highly into that kind of stuff. He was thinking more of like a spiritual, almost soulmate kind of thing. Him and Cedric are really soulmates. He had a connection with Cedric's children and everything like that. And they did talk just very briefly about where they're at now. The album they put out a couple years ago. They even mentioned that, the making of that, the whole inspiration behind that. But he says that they're sort of he didn't want to go back to the Mars Volta, but now he's kind of at peace with that. So they do have a potential future. So I mean, that's basically it. I mean, I'd like to watch it again, just to catch everything. But I would say that obviously if you're a fan of the Mars Volta or At the Drive-In, it's worth seeing. But this is not a music documentary, like a band documentary traditional style. It's telling the story, but it's really telling the story from a human level, and kind of maybe understanding a little bit more about their relationship. I mean, I always knew they had a strong or like a close relationship. Obviously, when they split At the Drive-In, Omar and Cedric ended up forming the Mars Volta. So they, the 2 other guys, Jim and I don't remember the other 2 or 3 other guys, formed Sparta. I know, but I've never been able to get into Sparta. I've never spent a lot of time with their music. Listened to one of their albums many years ago, but it's really more about it's really more about just his relationship, his take, his sort of feeling, his experiences. They've gone through a lot of drama and a lot of difficult experiences now, exposure to a lot of drugs and that kind of stuff, and just the industry. I mean, I get the impression that he never wanted to have his music be kind of, perceived or found not the wrong audience. I don't know if stardom really was the ultimate intention for him and maybe both him and Cedric. I mean, they obviously wanted to have success. They didn't have any money for a long time, and that was part of it. They were living on like $2 a day on the road. But they got to be pretty big. It's weird. I mean, I would think if they would have had maybe about or slightly more of the same level of success that Dredge, if they would have paved the same path that Dredge did, they probably would have had less drama. But then again, you know, you say art, some of the best art is made through drama and, you know, a lot of hardships or stress. And obviously for my own personal, like, take and taste on the way history went, if the Mars Volta did not become as big, even at the drive-in to some degree, as known as they became, not that everyone knows them, but among, you know, music fans, music circles, and progressive rock, if they did not, some of the stuff that I discovered, probably I would have still discovered, but I think their imprint on the last 25 years of music, or 20 years, I guess you could say, because the first EP came out a little over 20 years ago. It would be different, probably, but I just think from a sort of a mental health, sort of a health long-term standpoint, I partially feel, I kind of wish they would have had a little bit of easier time. And now, you know, based on what Omar said, is like, you know, they didn't want to sort of be stuck limiting themselves where they were at the drive-in. So I wonder if with the Mars Volta that kind of happened with, where they felt like they were kind of stuck limiting themselves. Now, they were putting out, and he was putting out all these solo records and everything. He's got like 80 solo albums or something. So some of it's quantity over quality. It's a little bit like the King Gizzard thing. But in a way, actually, King Gizzard sort of took over for them in a way. I mean, I liked them much more than the King Gizzard, the Lizard Wizard. But I just reading on Reddit that the filmmaker said, or something like that, that Omar and Cedric don't really consider, at least Omar, the albums after Ambitexture as sort of canon of the Mars Volta, which is weird, but I guess it's fine. I can sort of understand. You can see the ambition with those first three records. They were very ambitious, and starting with Bedlam and Goliath and Octahedron, and I even Nocturnicate. Even though I like Nocturnicate, I can understand that. And even the new record, I guess, from a standpoint of doing something different, is doing something different, doing something kind of trying to push some boundaries to some degree. But I wish they would kind of take that ambition and still do something a little more extensive. I don't know. Is their future doing the stuff they did on the self-titled from a few years ago? Then I'm just going to be considered an early Mars Volta fan if they have a long history of doing... I don't know. Maybe they'll be hit and miss or like Humphreys McGee, but I could totally understand to some degree why there's a difference between John Theodore being the drummer. I mean, maybe they need to reunite with John Theodore. He wasn't on, I don't think, the self-titled, but he's been on other bands. So anyway, I'll leave a link to the festival. It's called Krakow Film Festival, KFF VOD Festival, where you can stream it, and hopefully it'll show up either in some art houses, on some streaming networks. That would be an obvious one. It shows up on Netflix or Hulu or one of those eventually, or you know, just other means to find a way to see it, because it's definitely worth seeing. But again, if you're a fringe Mars Volta fan, you're expecting like your traditional story of the band documentary. It's not exactly like that. I mean, the title kind of suggests that if it ever gets, the whole quote he goes, "If this ever gets weird, we can stop," you know. And I don't know. I wonder after Epitextures, that was the kind of thing. Is like it got to be weird with John Theodore leaving, and you know, of course, they brought in Thomas Pridgen. They did show Thomas Pridgen briefly, but they didn't talk about like some of the hang-ups I've had about, you know, Bedlam and Goliath and Octahedron. I don't hate as a record, but you know, it doesn't have some of the issues. But you know, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. They talk more about Bosnian Rainbows and Antimass than the Mars Volta records. But the documentary isn't just about the Mars Volta, even though a lot of people like myself are probably coming to the documentary because we love the Mars Volta. So, but yeah, that's my take on that. Hopefully I can get to 1992 later today. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.